Hey everyone, welcome back. Glad to have you with us as always. Today we're taking a deep dive into something I know a lot of you are super curious about. South Africa's approach to education, specifically how they think about assessment. We got some really interesting research from you guys actually, so this deep dive is all about unpacking that.
It's fascinating stuff, really. The
Mm.
way South Africa has woven assessment into the core of their system, especially in the post-apartheid era. They moved away from that very teacher-centric model to something so much more student-focused.
Yeah, this shift toward student-centered learning really comes through in the research. And what I appreciated was the focus on practical methods. Like right off the bat, they jump into formative versus summative assessments. And I've got to say their take on it resonated with me.
Yeah, it's a classic pairing for a reason. Formative assessment is like that constant check-in, that pulse you're taking to make sure students are on track. And it's not just about catching misunderstandings early on, it's about using those insights to shape the learning journey as you go. Like, think about those diagnostic tests at the start of a new unit. Those give educators, a real roadmap for where they need to focus.
Absolutely. It's personalized learning in action. And then you've got those regular feedback loops, which the article emphasizes aren't just about slapping a grade on something. It's about giving specific, useful advice that helps a student actually get it, not just memorize for a test.
Precisely. Now, on the flip side, you've got summative assessments. Those are your big picture evaluations like standardized tests, major exams, that sort of thing. They give you that valuable snapshot of where a student's knowledge is at a specific moment in time.
Right. It's like zooming out to see the whole landscape after focusing on those individual trees with formative assessments. You really need both perspectives for a complete understanding. Now, one thing I found super interesting was their discussion of school-based assessments, or SBAs. Before reading this, I honestly didn't grasp how central they are to the South African system.
Oh, they're essential. SBAs aren't just a one-time test, you see. They're integrated throughout a student's entire journey, capturing progress, the different projects, presentations, you name it. Imagine a student, maybe a little nervous, presenting their research, knowing it all feeds into their overall SBA.
Hmm.
Or a group of teachers, very carefully moderating those assessments, making sure things are fair for everyone. It's a really comprehensive approach.
It makes total sense when you lay it out like that, but I can also see how it adds a layer of, well, complexity. Because even with the best of intentions, there's always a chance of teacher bias creeping in, isn't there? The article brings that up, how our own experiences and perspectives, even unconsciously, can influence how we assess student work.
Oh, absolutely. It's something we have to acknowledge. We're all human. We all have our biases, like the halo effect, where students' past performance might color how we see their current work, or confirmation bias, when we unintentionally seek out evidence that supports what we already believe. It's about being aware of those pitfalls and actively working against them.
Which makes their emphasis on clear rubrics even more crucial. A good rubric is like having a universal translator for expectations.
Couldn't agree more. It levels the playing field by ensuring everyone's on the same page about what defines success.
But with SBAs, there's another thing to think about, and the article doesn't shy away from it. Resource disparities. A well-funded school can implement certain SBAs that a school with limited resources simply can't. It made me consider how things like access to technology can impact not just the types of assessments used, but also the skills those assessments are able to evaluate.
It's a critical point. And it brings us to a question that underpins everything South Africa's trying to do.
Hmm.
How do you ensure your assessments are truly measuring what matters, especially given how diverse the contexts are? And that's where their curriculum and assessment policy statements, or CIPS, come into play.
Okay, so break down CIPS for me. What are they exactly, and how do they fit into all of this?
Think of CIPS as the guiding light for both how they design their curriculum and how they approach assessment. They outline, in very specific terms, the knowledge, skills, and even values they expect students to develop at each grade level.
So it's not just about testing raw knowledge. It's about evaluating how well students are grasping those broader skills, those values that are all laid out in CIPS.
Precisely. And that's where the idea of alignment comes in, which the article stresses again and again. Assessments can't exist in a bubble. They have to be carefully designed to measure specific learning goals.
So it's like CIPS is the blueprint, and assessments are the tools to check if the building's going up right, making sure everything matches what they planned.
Exactly. And the article makes this great comparison about, a tailor carefully measuring someone for a suit. Each stitch, each seam has to be precise to get that perfect fit. Assessments should be the same way, right? designed to measure how well students are grasping those skills, those knowledge points, all outlined in CFES.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But I'm curious about the practical side of things. We've talked types of assessments, but how does South Africa actually make sure they're using them well, especially with those resource differences we talked about?
Right, it's multifaceted, but the article points out a few key things. One that stuck with me was the focus on using a variety of assessment methods. It's not one size fits all. They get that some kids shine on written tests, others maybe it's projects, presentations, portfolios even.
Yeah, it's about recognizing different ways of learning, giving students multiple paths to show what they know.
Exactly. And it's not just learning styles either. It's about making sure the assessment actually measures the right skill, the right knowledge, not just a student's ability to, I don't know, perform under pressure or whatever.
Right, you wouldn't judge a fish by how well it climbs a tree. Makes sense.
Exactly. And that's where assessment for learning comes in, which the article touches on. It's about moving away from assessment, just being about evaluation. Instead, it's part of how kids learn.
So less about just grading, more about using it to shape how you teach, the feedback you give, helping students become more effective learners.
Absolutely. And this is where, like we said before, formative assessment is crucial. Those regular check-ins, the feedback loops, they're all about keeping students on the right track, spotting any areas where they might need extra help.
Creating this constant back and forth between teaching and assessment then.
Yeah, and here the article highlights teacher training, professional development. Even with the best plans, the best assessments, it comes down to the educators, right? They're the ones making it happen in the classroom.
Makes sense. You can have the best tools in the world, but gotta know how to use them.
Precisely. And South Africa seems to get that. They emphasize continual training, making sure teachers have the knowledge, the skills, the confidence to use assessment well, to really help students learn.
It's like giving educators this superpower, not just measuring understanding, but shaping it, guiding it through how they assess.
That's a great way to put it. Now, the article doesn't go too deep into specific training programs, but it does mention some key focuses.
Mm-hmm.
One is developing what they call assessment literacy in teachers. It's more than just knowing how to give a test. It's understanding the different types, what they're good at, what their weaknesses are, when to use which one, how to make sure they line up with what you're trying to teach, that they fit the situation.
Being fluent in the language of assessment, you mean? Not just the words, but like really understanding how to use it to communicate, to figure out what kids know.
Exactly. And it's not just teachers going it alone either. They talk about collaborative assessment too. Teachers working together, moderating, sharing what works for them, making sure things are consistent and fair across different classrooms, different schools even.
Building a team spirit around assessment, then. It's not just one teacher's job, it's a shared responsibility to help kids learn.
Yeah, precisely. And that team approach, it's especially important in South Africa, right? Given their history, the inequalities that still exist, different schools having different resources.
Right, because by working together, sharing what they're doing well, teachers in schools with more can help lift up those in schools with less, trying to make things fairer for all students.
You got it. Now, while this research focuses on South Africa, I think there's a lot here for educators anywhere. Making sure assessments match your learning goals, using a mix of methods, making assessment part of how you teach, encouraging collaboration. These are all good ideas no matter where you are.
Totally agree. It's a real mindset shift, moving away from assessment as this thing you just do to measure and seeing it as something that can improve teaching and learning for everyone.
Absolutely. Moving away from that old view
Yeah.
of assessment being like a necessary evil,
Hmm.
it can actually be this powerful tool for positive change.
We've talked a lot about what South Africa does, the why behind it all. But for our listeners who are ready to put this into practice, the research actually gives some pretty concrete takeaways, best practices I'm excited to dig into.
All right, let's open up that toolbox then, shall we? So, ready to crack open that assessment toolkit and see what's inside.
Absolutely. Let's make this practical. Hit me with those best practices.
All right, well, one of the simplest but most effective takeaways is the power of a good rubric. I know it sounds basic, but honestly, the difference is huge.
Yeah, like we were saying earlier, rubrics take the guesswork out of it. Students know what's expected. Teachers know what to look for. Everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. And when you can get students involved in understanding those rubrics, even better, it makes the whole assessment process feel more transparent, more like something they're a part of.
Right, it's not just checking boxes. It's understanding why those boxes matter in the first place.
And speaking of students taking ownership, the research also highlighted the importance of self-assessment, giving kids that space to reflect on their own learning, And I don't just mean grading their own work. It's about helping them step back, think about how they learn best, where their strengths are.
It's like giving them a mirror to see their own
Right.
progress, to recognize what they're doing well and what they could push themselves on.
Precisely. And when students have that ability, it changes the whole game. Assessment isn't this scary thing done to them. It's a tool they can use to grow.
Which ties into another big point they made: feedback. And not just any feedback, but the kind that's specific, timely, actually tells you what to do with it.
Oh, absolutely. Ditch those generic comments. The feedback that really makes a difference is the why behind it all. Why did this work? How could this be better? But most importantly, what can you, the student, do next to keep learning?
It turns feedback into a conversation, not just a one-way street.
Exactly. And it goes back to that constant feedback loop, right? Assessment isn't this separate event. It's woven into everything you're doing in the classroom.
Right, those formative check-ins, those little pulse checks along the way, they let you see if everyone's getting it and if you need to adjust how you're teaching.
You got it. And that's where things like teacher observation, just noticing what's happening in the classroom, those are powerful tools too. It's about catching those aha moments, those little struggles, and being ready to adapt.
It's like being a learning detective, right? Gathering your clues, changing your approach as you go based on what you're seeing.
Love that analogy
Yeah.
because it really gets at how dynamic assessment should be. It's not about rigidly following a script. It's about responding to what your students need right there in the moment.
Finding that balance between having a plan, but also having the flexibility to meet students where they're at in their learning.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, assessment is about discovery. For the student, yes, but for us educators too.
This has been fantastic, you know. You've really broken down these assessment strategies in a way that feels both practical and, honestly, kind of inspiring.
Well, if listeners walk away feeling a little more excited about assessment, I'd call that a win. Because when we do it right, it can completely change how we think about not just measuring learning, but the whole process of teaching and learning together.
Absolutely. It's about moving past that old view of assessment as this chore, this necessary evil, and seeing the potential it has to make things better for everyone. So, to everyone listening, take these ideas, these strategies, and don't be afraid to make them your own. Experiment, talk to other educators, see what works for you, and never stop exploring how powerful effective assessment can be. This was great. Until next time, everyone.